Are you ready to have your mind blown? The Ziigaat brand launched just over a year ago, about 13 months ago. And in that time, there's literally been one new Ziigaat IM every month, which means, yeah, we're up to Ziigaat number 13. And I'm gonna say right now, I think this one's their best. Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review. And today we're taking a look at the new Ziigaat Horizon, which is, well, let's say, what can we say about this? This is their 13th Ziigaat, and it's kind of interesting, just the whole Ziigaat thing, I feel like over the past year has turned into, people now ask me like, what's the best Ziigaat? Which feels like a weird question to ask. Like I feel like you should be shopping for IMs in a price range and maybe for a given sound signature, but no, people are just shopping for Ziigaats. So what's the best Ziigaat? In my opinion, this one is so far, at least of the ones I've heard. What it is a tribrid IM that's got 2 dynamic drivers, 2 balanced armatures wait, hold on, no, I got that wrong. It's 1 dynamic driver, 2 balanced armatures, 2 planar drivers. And the planars, I'm gonna assume, are microplanars, although they don't really explain it on the Linsol website. But it's a tribrid IM, and the price on it is coming in at $330. But I think even more interesting to me than whatever the driver configuration is the frequency response here of the Horizon. Because it is very similar to a couple of other IMs that have gotten quite a bit of hype earlier this year. Have you ever heard of the Zen's Top Pro or the TBH Audio Monarch Mark IV? Because this frequency response has got a lot in common with those. And while the price on this is not cheap, $330 again, it's a fraction of the price of those others that I just talked about. So are we looking at a mini Monarch of sorts, a short king, you could say? Well, for the past couple of weeks, I've been listening to the Ziigaat Horizon, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. But before we get to that, a quick shout out to Linsol for sending in the Horizon for review. If you want to check it out, of course, I've got them linked in the description down below. But with that said, let's go to the table. We'll talk about what you get inside the box of the Horizon, physical form factor, build quality, all that stuff. And then of course, we're going to talk about the sound, how it compares to those other IMs I just mentioned, although I will warn, it'll be a pretty brief comparison. But also, maybe more importantly, how does this compare to my favorite IM at a very similar price point? So let's do that. Here is the box. It looks like a Ziigaat box, maybe a little bit different than some of their others, but it's a box. And what you get inside of it is what you see here on the table. Let me put the IM to the side for a moment and just highlight this carrying case. So this is one of the nicer carrying cases that we've seen on, I think it was a similar carrying case that we got with the Odyssey 2, but I've already forgotten. So many Ziigaats. But anyway, as you can see, it is nice and padded on the inside. Plenty of room for your spare ear tips to just kind of float around in space. Or of course, you could store them up here and keep them nice and tidy if you were not a monster like I apparently am. But yeah, I don't know, it's a nice carry case, built well, a little bit bigger than I would typically use, but very, very useful. And then apart from that, well, let's focus on the ear tips real quickly, because there's 3 different styles of ear tips that are included in the box. And I like to see this. I'm gonna keep saying this. I like to see multiple different styles of ear tips in a box because it's just very nice to be able to try different fits and find out what works with you. Now, I will say that these 2 ear tips fit pretty similar to each other, so there's not gonna be a drastic difference, although what you are looking at is, I think these are both mediums. I don't know. They're slightly different in their shape, but more or less they're pretty similar. They're both actually surprisingly tacky in terms of like their grip level, so they should give you a decent fit stability, although they are both kind of this conical shape with a similar depth level, so you're not going to go a whole lot of variance in terms of managing that ear tip insertion depth, which I think actually has a big role to play in terms of sound quality as well as fit and comfort. And then the last ear tip is, yeah, you do get 1 set of foam ear tips. And it doesn't come in multiple sizes, and personally I'm not a big fan of foam tips, but if you are a big fan of foam tips, you are supplied, as long as that is roughly the size of your ear. Now, apart from the ear tips and the case, well, you do also get this, which means that, yes, the cable on this guy is a swappable termination, which I like to see, because you can go between standard 3.5 mil over here or 4.4 mil balanced if you like to do that. What I will say is the same thing I've kind of said about this cable when I've seen it before, is it's not my favorite cable for a couple of reasons. One, while we're looking at the terminations, this is just a long termination, okay? Let's compare this to a similarly swappable termination, and you can see that this cable, or this termination over here, it's like a good 1.5 centimeters longer. Like that's That's a lot of extra length. It just means that this ends up being a little bit bulky and a little bit cumbersome for me. The other thing that I don't love about this swappable termination is that there's no retention mechanism, right? It just kind of slides in and out. And this one is also not particularly stiff. So it's very likely that if you were to grip onto the back of this termination like this, pull this out of your digital audio player, well, you might leave this part behind, especially if you're using the 4.4, which happens to be more often a little bit stiffer on the DAP side. But I guess enough harping about this swappable termination. Let me show you the rest of the cable, which I also don't really love. I'd say this is my least favorite part of the Ziigaat build quality is the cables that they use. And it's just a little bit kind of ratty looking. You can see it's a little memory prone. It's a little thin and wiry, especially up here near the top. And then you get into these preformed ear hooks, which just look really plasticky and are not my favorite look. Now, of course, it is a standard 2-pin connector, so you can swap these things out with another cable if you'd like. You can see it's not a recessed connector or anything like that, or a recessed, on the IEM side, although there is a bit of a protrusion on the cable side, which just means that this ends up being a little bit on the tall side. Could be a little bit shorter if they went with either a recess on the IEM side or a little bit shorter of a connector. Personally, I'll just show you what I've been using. I've been using this cable, which is a Dunu Lyre mini cable. Has kind of like the same problem in terms of the height, but it's just a much nicer looking cable. Doesn't look so ratty and cheap. So that would be my preference for cable pairing with the Horizon. But I guess enough harping on this cable. Let's talk about the earpieces themselves. So I'll punch in so you can take a look at them. And just to say aesthetically, I think these are probably some of the better looking Ziigaat IEMs that I've seen. A lot of the times you just have kind of random glitter patterns on them. And some of them look kind of bad, to be honest. Some of them look fine and just kind of forgettable. This one I would say is less forgettable because it's kind of a unique design in that it's got, I think this is supposed to be the horizon. These are mountains or something like that. But it also takes a little bit of interpretation. They're also sideways when you're in your ear. So it feels a little bit off, but I don't know. I kind of like the colors. I'll say that. I like the colors that they've used here. Now for the rest of the ear shell, is that what we call these things? It's basically pretty familiar Ziigaat shape. It's also a familiar resin that we've seen. You might have noticed when we reviewed the Ziigaat Odyssey 2 last month, which was last month's Ziigaat. That one, they had switched over to a metal shell, and I wasn't sure if that was going to be like the new direction of Ziigaat. Well, this one confirms that it's not. They're back to the plastic shells, the resin shells, which for me is actually not really a big problem. I don't really mind the shells being resin as long as they feel nice and feel quality. And I think that these things do feel quality. The bigger issue I have with the shell is more just to do with the fit and the shape. It is not particularly molded. There's a little bit of molding here, and I'll show you what it looks like in my ear. But in terms of fit and comfort, it just ends up being a little bit long actually on the nozzle length. Even though it doesn't look particularly long, I'll say it fits long. And also there's just not a lot of contact with the ear. Now, I guess on the topic of the nozzle, this would be a good time to break out the calipers and measure it. Let's take a look at what we are looking at. I would say this is, it's pretty average, maybe even a little bit on the large side at 6.2 millimeters. I'm measuring it at the lip here, so that would be the widest part. So maybe a little bit on the wide side, but yeah, I guess that will actually kind of play a part because again, this is somewhat of a deep fitting IEM. And you might have noticed I'm not using the stock ear tips. Again, I think it's really important to find the right ear tips that works well for you. And I'll just say before we get into talking about the sound that this one is particularly sensitive to insert depth and like just all the different variables and stuff that you can control with your ear tip. And so for me, it worked out much better to go with a much shorter ear tip and let it fit a little bit deeper. So that's why I've got this one on me. Now, apart from that, I don't think there's anything else to say. Just check my notes. I don't think so. So I'm gonna throw this thing in my ear. And let's talk about in fit and comfort, although we've kind of already been talking about fit, but just to highlight for you, all right? There you go. See, you can get a deepish insert. You just got to go with a pretty small ear tip that is also short in terms of its nozzle extension. Is that what we call that? But once it's in my ear, I would say that this is kind of a medium size fitting shell. That is, again, not particularly ergonomic. Like it's not really fitting into the folds of my ear particularly well. You can see there's a little bit of a dimple here for the antitragus, but not much of it catches. To be honest, like I would say that the fit and comfort on this is kind of okay. Especially with the stock ear tips, I found that they fit deep, but they also are a little bit stiff, and probably part of that is because of the wide nozzle on there just giving them a lot of structure. Whereas again, with this ear tip, it fits me a little bit better. So your mileage may vary on that. I'll just say in terms of fit and comfort, these are fine for me, but they're not my favorite IMs to wear. I did sleep with them a couple nights, but I will say that they were also not the most comfortable sleeping IMs. I think I woke up both nights and took them out of my ears in the middle of the night. So that is, I think, as much as we need to talk about the physical form factor here on the Ziigaat Horizon. So what do we have to say about the sound of it? Well, let's go over to Squiglink. Take a look at the frequency response that I've measured on my rig. If you want to check this out for yourself, of course, I will have it linked in the description down below where you can compare this to literally hundreds of other IMs that I have graphed, including if you wanted to compare it to the Monarch Mark IV or the Top Pro. Because again, this frequency response, if you've seen those, this looks pretty similar. A couple of small differences, but I'll say it looks similar enough that I looked at it on a graph. I was like, this is going to sound kind of like those. And we're going to talk about how it doesn't sound like those. But to start with, just kind of describing what we're looking at in terms of frequency response. You can see the dotted line here in the background. That's like my neutral target. And if you ignore the bass boost and maybe ignore the treble boost, you can see that this is a pretty neutral looking mid-range. Maybe a little bit thin here in kind of like the lower mid-range. And I think that that is a difference that you will hear between this versus something like especially the Monarch Mark IV. But I don't know, it's basically a neutral, natural sounding mid-range that has, of course, a bass boost because you can't make an IM without a bass boost. And well, it does also have fairly extended upper treble. And by extended, I mean maybe boosted, maybe even a little bit on the over boosted side. But again, like this can be kind of dialed in depending on which ear tips you're wearing and how you fit it. But okay, so we're looking at a relatively neutral, kind of natural sounding mid-range, maybe a little bit on the thin side, but it does have somewhat of a bass boost, mostly pushed into the sub bass. So if you're looking for like a big, meaty, fun, exciting bass, that's not what you're gonna get here. But there is enough bass here that, I don't know, I'd be honest, like the way that the bass is executed on this, I would even dare to say that this is like within the realm of neutral sounding bass, even though it is boosted very clearly here on the graph, just in terms of, it doesn't sound out of place. The upper treble is the thing that will potentially be a limiting factor in terms of your enjoyment of this IM, but here's what I'm gonna say. In terms of my subjective listening impression, a lot of this actually works surprisingly well for me. I've already said that I think this is my favorite Ziigaat IM so far, and it's just, a lot of it has to do with that mid-range presentation. It is, I was talking about this on my Discord server, I think earlier this week, maybe last week, and the term I said was that it just kind of hits me right in the HRTF, which is to say, it just kind of lands really well for me. Like it in a way that's also kind of hard to describe because it just kind of sounds natural, very kind of transparent in terms of its tonal balance in the mid-range. Like the vocals just have this really nice textural quality and kind of an easiness about them as well. Again, at least for my ear, at least for my HRTF. Just gives it a nice sense of transparency to the vocals. Specifically, I was listening to, if you're curious about my music, I listen to, of course, I always talk about Men I Trust a lot, but specifically I was listening to a live album that they had released earlier this year. It's called Live Sessions Volume 2, which you don't have to go back and listen to, but if you want some really nice music, go check that out. And I was listening to that live album, and there was just something about the vocal presentation here with the Horizon that just seemed kind of next level to me. Like it really kind of took me by surprise. Just really good sense of transparency, but also like a good sense of weight and a good sense of texture and a good sense of detail. But not really like strained or edgy sounding in the way that something with maybe like a lot of lower treble might sound. Now, that said, the treble is a little bit on the risky side. It's just not so much the lower treble, and it's more going to be kind of like the upper treble. And frankly, it's going to be too much for a lot of people if especially you're not willing to play around with ear tips and find out what works best for your ear. I feel like even when I did get it dialed in, it still gives it kind of like a sandy, gritty kind of quality to some of the textural components of music. And I guess that's worst case scenario. It could sound just a little bit too gritty and a little bit too sandy. Okay, I said it said sandy and gritty at its best, but it just kind of gets dialed up to the point of being maybe a little bit distracting. Again, depending on how well I had this thing situated in my ear. So it is risky. It's going to be on the edge. I think for some people, if your ear's exactly like mine, it's going to work out pretty well. If you wear these ear tips, which if you're curious, these are TRN T-ear, I believe is the model number or the model name. But yeah, I just know that's going to be kind of like a risky, contentious point about the sound of this IM. Now, the bass on this thing is actually really nice. I already kind of alluded to the fact that it is boosted, yes, but it also doesn't really sound overbearing at all. It doesn't sound bloated or boomy or anything like that. It's balanced, but it is felt bass, right? There's enough bass there to give it kind of a nice sense of impact and a nice sense of weight to it. Specifically, like the low bass, like the deep bass, has like this really satisfying, again, just kind of like transparency and almost like resonance to it that I found really pretty addicting on the music I've been listening to. Again, that Man I Trust album, quite nice. Also been listening to a lot of Parcel's new album, if you're interested in that. So check out, there's a couple of music recommendations for your week. Men I Trust, Live Sessions, and the Parcel's, I think it's called Love. Good albums. But anyway, back to the IM. Kind of that combination of the slight grittiness, the slight sandiness to the upper treble, as well as that really nice hitting low bass. Even though I described the mid-range tonality on this being a little bit on the thin side, and it is, like, it doesn't have like this thick wooliness to it at all. It's kind of like, again, more on the transparent kind of analytical side. It still has like a surprisingly satisfying density to the sound overall. And that was just like a sense that I repeatedly got when I kept going back to the Horizon. It's just got this really satisfying density to the sound that makes it honestly pretty addicting to listen to. I think the imaging on this thing is also quite nice. Again, partly related to the fact that it does lean toward more of that transparent kind of analytical mid-range. It's got a nice sense of separation between instruments. Everything sounds really well separated, and it just sounds overall transparent while also having a nice density. Like, it doesn't sound light and lifeless. So that's why I like this IM. But how does it compare to a couple of other IMs? I'll briefly mention the two IMs that I've compared this to in the intro, the Zen's Top Pro and the Monarch Mark IV. And I'm only going to briefly mention them for a couple of reasons. One, in terms of price range, like, they're just in different brackets. So like, most people aren't going to be cross-shopping this. The other reason is I just don't happen to have them on hand right now. The Zen's Top is on loan, and I only had the Monarch Mark IV briefly. But what I can say is that there are some similarities in between just kind of like the naturalness of the mid-range of these three IMs. On a graph, this one graphs with maybe like the thinnest kind of lower mid-range, but also surprisingly, and this is where I get back to that sense of density that I'm getting from this, it has more of a sense of density and body and weight behind it than whatever I got from the Top Pro. So those complaints that I had, those qualms I had with the Top Pro just being a little bit unsatisfying, I really don't get that here with the Horizon. I would say that the Top Pro's treble now, on the other hand, is smoother. Like, it's gonna be less gritty, less sandy, but I guess kind of a byproduct of that effect here is that it just ends up making the sound, again, more weighty and more, I guess, realistic in a way, and less kind of like bodiless, less ethereal. Versus the Monarch, I would say that the Monarch kind of splits the two in terms of that weightiness. I think this is maybe a little bit weightier and denser than the Monarch, but the Monarch doesn't have the same, I don't know, it has more weight to me than the Top Pro. So I found the Monarch to be more satisfying. As well, I would say that the Monarch's treble is smoother than the treble you're going to get here on the Horizon. I think fewer people are going to have issues with the Horizon or with the Monarch's treble than you might with the Horizon. But I don't know. I'll say that the Monarch, I think, is quite a bit more refined sound, but it's also kind of a little bit duller sounding. And I would say that the difference for me is not big enough that I would justify not just the cost, but even more importantly, putting the thing in my ear. The Monarch Mark IV is just uncomfortable to wear. This thing, while not my favorite fitting ear shell, it's definitely a lot more comfortable for me than the Monarch. But how does this compare to another IM that you're maybe more likely to be cross-shopping this against? Another hybrid-ish IM at a similar price point? Well, we've got, of course, the Soft Ears Volume S. And this is actually a pretty interesting comparison because they're priced pretty similarly, $330 versus $320. Driver configuration is pretty different. Again, this is a dynamic driver, 2 BAs, 2 planars. This is a dynamic driver, 1 passive dynamic driver, and then 2 BAs, and then that's it. But the bigger difference, as always, is going to come down to the tuning. Like, the tuning choices behind these things are what separate them, not so much the drivers. I mean, the drivers contribute to that. But anyway, here's how they're different. This is also like a very nice natural sounding mid-range, but it's much more on the fuller side, a much more bodied sound than what we get over here on the Horizon. It's also softer in the treble. It's going to be just a lot easier to listen to for more people. But the downside, or maybe the trade-off there, is that I think that the imaging on the Horizon is a lot more distinct. The separation between sounds is just a lot more distinct and clear, whereas imaging on the Volume S I actually think is pretty good, but it's not necessarily its strength. It's like, it does have a bit of a wooliness about its lower mid-range because it is pretty full in the lower mid-range. Now, the other thing that is kind of interesting is the bass comparison between these, because the Horizon has like a more distinct bass shelf that I think more people are going to look at the graph and think, okay, well, that's the bass he set. But no, man, when you listen to them, the bass on the Volume S is just like so much more a part of the mix of that sound signature. There's no getting away from it. It's very nice, impactful. Kick drums hit really hard with authority here in the Volume S. And it's not like an overbearing bass, but it can be it's just a lot more felt and a lot more physical, whereas the Horizon's bass is actually pretty well done, but it's not as dominant in the mix of the sound. So yeah, overall, I would feel like the difference between these two is that the Horizon's going to give you kind of more of this tonal, transparent sound. Again, a stronger sense of imaging, but also maybe a little bit of a grittiness and a little bit of a rough texture to the treble, whereas the Volume S is going to be a lot smoother in the treble, a lot fuller and kind of softer through the mid-range sound, but also still ends up having pretty decent imaging performance, and then the bass tactility is just kind of next level on the Volume S. But I don't know, I think that's going to do it for my thoughts here on these IEMs. And of course, we're going to wrap up our review here on the Ziigaat Horizon. Out of 5 stars, I enjoyed this one. This is the type of IEM that made me want to keep listening to music, right? I had that experience with the Men I Trust album, just being kind of next level transparent in terms of that vocal presentation. So I was like, okay, what does this do on this album? What does this do on that album? And that is the kind of experience that I like to get from an IEM. I like to be not just pleased with the sound. I like to be kind of pulled into it and engaged in this exploration of what does this do with that. Now, it's not perfect. It does have a bit of roughness in the treble that, again, for some people is going to be a bigger issue than it is going to be for others. I was able to deal with it. And if you think you're interested in checking it out, of course, I've got it linked in the description down below. While you're down there, if you haven't yet, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, join me on Discord, also linked down below. And I'll catch you in the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future.